proud to be a woman.
Girls and women are
powerful,
beauty,
badass, feminine,
passion,
equality,
power, professional,
diligence,
advocates for change.
Welcome to She Plus, the female empowerment podcast that tells the extraordinary stories of everyday humans. I'm your host, Elise Dean. On today's episode, we spoke with Maddie Stambaugh, an art teacher and marathon runner, about her journey with physical fitness. Do you know those people in your life who are always good at keeping a conversation? And not just any conversation, I mean a conversation that is actually genuine and authentic. And they're those people that are skilled at connecting with other people. Those people who are naturally very kind, bubbly, and gregarious. Almost like they emanate a bright light when they walk into a room. I don't mean for this to sound creepy, so I'm sorry if it does, but not really. Because that's my impression of Maddie Stambaugh, who's the guest for this episode. She's a very down-to-earth and pure-intentioned person who loves connecting with people. In fact, that's one of the main reasons why she became a teacher.
I knew that teaching would be what I want to do, and I think if anything would be the core root of why I want to teach is I love working with people, and people of all ages. Outside of school, I've worked at those kind of paint studios where you teach all ages and you have to kind of differentiate. So it's all in school, out of school. I like getting to know individual people and finding their story and just finding a level of connection and mutual interests.
Maddie is a middle school art teacher in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is actually where we met when we both attended college at Wake Forest University. By day, she's teaching her students how to draw, paint, and use other artistic mediums. Maddie says she's known that she wanted to be a teacher for as long as she can remember, and art has always been her favorite subject. So it seemed like a no-brainer.
The first question every artist gets is like, what's your medium? And I would describe it in stages where in high school it was printmaking because my art teacher dabbled in including printmaking my senior year, and so it was like an elective, and so I got a taste of what that looked like. In Wake, I took a printmaking course, and the professor was awesome, and printmaking was just the studio that I felt most comfortable with. I definitely shied away from sculpture and 3D work. And when I look at the progression of my pieces as an artist, I started off in high school as this perfectionist where everything with pencil and you want to erase everything. And then my teacher handed me a stick of charcoal, which erases with a different kind of eraser and gets all messy and your hands get dirty. And I loved it because you couldn't reach perfection with charcoal. And so going through college, it was a lot of collage work. And I think now my free time, I'm always sketching, but at times it's pulling out my oil paints. I will admit right now with pandemics and everyone getting a hobby, I think I have not spent as much time on my own personal art just because I'm trying to discover new things. I've started to make kombucha.
But after class is dismissed, Maddie has something else on her plate that keeps her pretty busy. Like I mentioned before, she's a marathon runner. Before I share her current running stats with you, which they'll blow your mind, I want to share more about how Maddie got into running in the first place. Like art, her passion for running stemmed from being involved in sports when she was younger.
I started as a young kid doing CYO track, and I remember showing up to this dirt track and not knowing many people, and the coaches with young kids, you just got to make it fun. And so it was never in terms of the 100 or the 400 or the mile, but we were 7, and it was just run from this point to that point as fast as you can. And some part of that competitive kid drive, you're I'm going to do this. In my whole childhood and into young adult college world, soccer was my number one. And so when I was middle schooler, total social life took over. I did middle school lacrosse. I didn't even want to touch running. And then in 8th grade, that dreaded mile in gym class, I remember putting on one song because we could listen to our iPods that day, which, yes, iPods. And I remember my gym class teacher being just impressed by this mile time, which I forget what it would have been at that point. And then the high school track coach being like, "You're going to do track in high school, right?" And I was like, "No, lacrosse." And then on that first day of spring sports, freshman year, showed up to track. And I think in the beginning of high school, track was just one of those things that running kept you in shape for soccer. It was like soccer was the number one. Running was just that every soccer player runs a lot of miles in a game, so I might as well just keep running.
Does anyone remember those dreaded mile runs in middle school? I do, and they definitely were not my favorite. But as time went on for Maddie, she grew to appreciate running on a deeper level.
I didn't love running for the reasons I love it now, but it definitely grew on me each year, and I think junior year was my breakthrough year in high school with both sports. Yeah, I mean, you show up to college and everyone says you have to manage your time wisely, and running was just one of those things that you can do anywhere without any materials other than sneakers. And I got to plug in like music, and I really fell in love with just going long and listening to music and just forgetting about anything else, but then coming back and getting ready for class at any given time each day. So I definitely would say I fell in love with running in college, if not for a different reason than when I did it in high school. I mean, I'm saying this with a smile on my face because that dreaded mile in middle school became my favorite event in high school. And I think when I look back at the distances I was running in meets, it was the mile, the 2 mile, and if I felt for it, it was the 800 as well. And so in track, those are like the longest distances you can go. And so when you think about those as distance running, the capacity to go farther off a track, it somewhat leads into that. Your mile just, as your competitive race becomes almost like the warm-up. And so a mile now is like half of the warm-up for me.
As a marathoner, Maddie runs a lot. Like she said, a mile is half of a warm-up for her. But what is a marathon? Let's back up here. A marathon is a running event with a distance of 42.195 kilometers, or 26.22 miles, aka a lot of running. You're likely familiar with some of the major marathon events, like the Boston Marathon or the Berlin Marathon. Tons of major cities like New York City, Tokyo, and Amsterdam host marathons on an annual basis. And marathoners like Maddie train for these events. Here are Maddie's running stats.
If I were to tell someone that I was a runner, I would define myself as primarily a marathoner. It is my favorite distance. I have gone farther. I've done 150K this past January, so I think the only official race I got in before the pandemic hit. But in terms of marathon stats, average time for a female is anything under 4 hours is considered like a wow fact. My marathon time, my first one started at 4 hours and 15 minutes. And I went into that race with like, that is kind of the aim. And now 6 years later, I'm at a 3 hours and 22 minutes. And so for a lot of runners, the first question you get is, or for a lot of marathoners is, have you run Boston? And for a long time I said, no. And then it became that like, once you go under 4 hours, you start to think, can I? And so that became definitely a goal of mine. And every few years, the standard gets a little faster. And so I got really close to it, and then they lowered it by 5 minutes. And then it became, and which it is at the current moment, 3 hours and 30 minutes. So to get faster than that, I'm really proud of my 3:22. It came in a race where the weather was 30 degrees, pouring rain, hurricane, basically. My half marathon time, which if you are someone who tracks pace, that you would hope that your half time, your pace for that would be a little faster than marathon just because you're doing half the distance. And then a race where your fastest pace would be the mile. The 5K is like the death trap in distance running, but it's a killer. As a marathoner, we hate the 5K, and I really didn't even do my first one until last summer. But my half marathon pace is time is 1:34, and then the 5K is a 19:20, and so that's about 6:14 pace. My mile, I will never get my high school mile time again, which was like low fives, but current mile pace is 5:49.
But this year, marathoners, professional runners, and all other athletes were forced to reckon with something new: coronavirus. Because of coronavirus, the 2020 Boston Marathon and many others were canceled. And it's worth noting that this is the first time that the Boston Marathon has been canceled in its 124-year history. Well, not canceled necessarily. They just went virtual.
Definitely sad not to be running Boston in Boston, but I usually spend part of my summer up in the Boston, Cape Cod area, and so me being that like attitude is where it's at, I had to kind of shift it. I was a little negative at first, but ultimately, rightfully so, they needed to cancel, and so how we react to that is what drives us forward. And so I actually recruited a few friends, brought my puppy along, and I ran that Boston Marathon course by myself, and it was incredible. It wasn't the same, of course, but to run those tiny towns and to just be like, this is the most epic marathon there is, and I'm just doing it on a random Monday morning. I handed myself my old medal from Boston, and I will be doing the virtual one on Labor Day around Winston-Salem, and so it won't be the same. It'll be my 22nd marathon for sure. I know there's a lot of people who aren't counting these as official ones, but if I'm going to run the marathon distance, it's going to count. And so I'll get that Boston medal, and I will have a little better of a feeling that I ran it in 2020.
If you followed Maddie's journey on her running Instagram, MarathonMads94, you've probably noticed that she's smiling in 99% of her race photos. Now, I cannot speak for anyone else, but I know for a fact that I am not smiling when I'm running. I'm probably swapping between extreme focus and struggle when I'm on a run. But without fail, Maddie looks happier than ever when she's out on a run. And that's probably because she is.
Running or not, I would consider myself a very positive, optimistic person. But with running, it's like smiling through the pain. I will say I have a knack for knowing exactly where the photographers are. But that's half a lie. But no, I really enjoy those moments because, like I said before, I get to do this. I don't have to do this. So even in those moments of pain, it is just, sometimes it's a faking mechanism, but you are using less muscles to smile than you are to frown. But I think with running, I really am taking in everything around me. And so with races, I love races. Some people are runners and they do not do races, and that is totally okay. But for me, races mean so much more than just aiming for a time. They're the crowd support, the people next to you running who cheer you on, who have charities and names on their shirts, who all come with their own separate stories, and you don't necessarily know what they are. I just think that's incredible. It is that accomplished feeling of you can do hard things. And I find joy in it. And the Run Happy slogan is Brooks, the shoe and clothing company. And I only run in Brooks. I love Brooks. But it's so true. If you're not happy running, then I think you have to find the why are you running. And some people, it really is just a fitness thing. But you've got to find the happiness of it, or else it will become not a lifelong sport. And for me, I hope running can be a lifelong sport.
One of the things that I admire about Maddie is her mindset and attitude towards running. I have a love-hate relationship with running, and probably working out in general. There are days where I'm practically flying out the door because I crave a chance to just alleviate some of my stress through running. But there are also days where the couch is awfully enticing. I think it's probably this way for a lot of people. But still, sometimes it nags at me that I can't always stay consistent with my fitness. So I asked Maddie, as a 22-time marathoner, how does she stay consistent? And that answer might surprise you.
What's kept me going is the fact that I don't have to do this. I get to do this. And so making that a priority of if it's not like right for me at the time, then I can take a break. But for me, I've never really been strict on myself when it comes to a training plan. Like, I'm going to start 3 months out and I'm going to run this X many miles each week and I'm going to focus on my nutrition. But for me, it's been, I'll be honest, I have never kept to a plan, not in all my 21, almost 22 marathons, because for me, that would lose the fun in it. I love switching things up. I think that's also part of teaching is you just have this fun and art. You have this fun in creating your own life and your own schedule. And so if it doesn't work for me that day, I'm going to switch it. I'm going to alter it. So I think that's what's kept me going is if I stuck to a plan and then something went wrong, is how do you react to it? So your attitude when something changes. I definitely have moments where I am like, why am I doing this? And I think after I graduated college, it was right after a race where I attempted my first BQ, which was that 3.5, 3:35 at the time. And I didn't get it. And I was heartbroken. And I ran a marathon. Like anyone who finishes a race, I personally think my belief is if I finish a marathon or any race and I'm disappointed, then I didn't do it right, because you did the thing and you did it to the best ability that you could do that day. Like the best with what you've got. And so trying not to be so hard on myself, I needed a few months to come back from that. So I signed up for a few marathons that time was not the goal, and not every race has the same goal for me. And so I think just giving myself grace and knowing that a bad run's going to happen every so often. And I think that roller coaster just keeps it fun. The bad runs are just as meaningful.
I love that Maddie acknowledges that she isn't very strict on her fitness plan. She knows that she can take a break. And though it's my own personal dilemma, this is a mentality that I strive for, one where guilt doesn't surface if I choose to rest. And everyone is different. No singular fitness plan, goal, or mentality meets everyone's standards. But that damn comparison trap comes in at the worst times. More on that after the break.
This message is brought to you by She Plus Podcast.
At She Plus, lifting up stories and voices is an important part of the work we do, which is why I love shopping for products at Mess in a Bottle, a Black-owned business that aims to give voice to the voiceless. All of Mess in a Bottle's products display important messages that you'll be proud to wear while quarantined in your house. From t-shirts emblazoned with the word fearless to sweatshirts that say, as strong as the woman next to me, you're bound to find something that speaks to you. Check out my latest post to see what I bought from Mess in a Bottle. Shop now at messinabottle.com. Welcome back. On this episode of She Plus, we're talking with Maddie Stambaugh, a 22-time marathoner, about developing a positive fitness mentality. I'd like to preface this by saying, this is not a call-out. These are my own personal opinions and experiences, so please don't feel attacked by what I say. Okay, who here has an Apple Watch? And who here shares their Apple Watch activity data with family or friends? Yep, that's me. I used to do that. But after a while, I started to realize that I was defining my workouts by these reminders and push notifications on my watch. Or if all of my friends have worked out today, then I should too. It was almost like a silent competition. And of course, competition can be friendly and keep you motivated. But if you're anything like me, I'm as competitive as they come. So it turned toxic. Fast. I was talking to a friend about this earlier, who also shares her watch activity with friends. We agreed that the data sharing was negatively affecting our lifestyles. So we both tried working out without the watches, just to see how it would go. For me, it was liberating. Now, full transparency time. I still use a watch to track my own stats. I'm wearing one right now as I record this sentence. But I keep my stats very private, and I don't follow other people's stats anymore. I had to learn that my stats are for me and for me only. Now, whether or not what I just said applies to you at all, Maddie shared some of these similar sentiments in our interview about watch and data tracking apps. In short, we agree, it's a double-edged sword situation.
Our bodies they can't distinguish stress. And so right now with work stress and going back to work and just balancing a new puppy and work schedules, my body's reading that as stress. And so when I'm like, I should be going out for a run and I'm not, it's just like, whew, take a moment. Rest is needed because you're going to tackle that run and you're not going to lose fitness in a few days. I see that intensity in running leads to burnout. The apps that you can track your classes and trying to get high enough 100 marks, I think that might lead to burnout for some people. Some people can manage that really well and they need that structure. And I could speak all for accountability and holding yourself to it, because if I'm going to go out and run tomorrow and I don't tell anyone about it and I don't go out for a run tomorrow, I'm the only one who's holding myself accountable. And so I think in running, the intensity can lead to burnout for some people, which for runners, that burnout tends to be injury. And so injury usually comes from overworking, and knock on any wood around me, I've been fairly lucky. I think it's because I take the grace in resting. I've learned over the last recent years, and I'm not old by any means, but bodies need rest, and I'm giving myself more rest than I used to. But watches and the new invention of like tracking your data, it's been around for a while, but the new fad of like Strava, where you can use any form of watch, but then you ultimately upload it and your results can be public. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because I really think when I started to use those things and when I started to use a watch and I could track my pace, before I was using a stopwatch, and I'm like, I don't know what pace I ran a marathon, but it was in like 4 hours. I use Strava and I can track my training and it's wonderful. But like I said before, that training plan is like whatever I want it to be. But seeing other people's stats and then comparing them to yours is definitely a flag sometimes. And I have had to I just did recently where I took a week off of posting because I couldn't be on the website. And I will admit, like, the comparison trap is for the amateur runner, for the elite runner. Like, imagine if the elite runners could track each other and then before going into a race be like, I know what you ran yesterday. And I think it's a great invention. It's really helpful because they market it as, and it is, community. It's a network. You can give each other kudos and really kind of boost each other up, being like, oh, wait, if I'm not going to run tomorrow, people are going to know. And so that is a really good form of accountability. But the step counting, the competitions at work for the step counts definitely can be a trap sometimes. So finding and training your brain to not have it be everything.
And what Maddie references here is something she calls the comparison trap. For me, when I was on these sharing apps, I found myself drawing comparisons between my friends' physical fitness and my own. Who worked out longer? Who burned more calories? Like, why does that matter so much to me? This mentality was toxic for my own sanity, so I had to step away. And hey, let me back up here. Maybe that's something you like to see. It might motivate you, and that is great. It just wasn't for me personally. Like Maddie says, we are all very different.
The comparison trap, I would say, is definitely something that athletes face in all sports, in academics too. And so everyone's got their different mile pace. My fitness shouldn't be comparable to anybody else's fitness. And just time commitments. Like someone's like, how do you do all of this? It's like, because when you find the dedication, when you find something you love to do, you make the time, and that's for anything. And so I'm just as wowed at these as well, because 2 years ago, I wasn't seeing these times. It just, something in me clicked, and it's like, if you want it, you got to work for it.
Maddie's passion for running all boils down to her mantra. My mantra is probably like, just eat the damn chocolate, or if you're not early, you're late. Maddie's is a lot like our favorite bluefish character from Finding Nemo. Keep going.
The most obvious cliche answer would be like one foot in front of the other. You're going to keep going. But I see it as so much more. I smile every time I read it in a book, because it's not just about running. It's life. And as cliche as that can also sound, I do firmly believe that in tough times, if you have something that holds you to kind of finding the light at the end of the tunnel, or keeping yourself always looking towards something, like I'm a planner. If you have something to look forward to on a calendar, you can be like, I can make it through this week, especially if work is really tough. If you've got something, and it's hard with COVID canceling everything, but if you have like one thing to look forward to, that will keep driving you forward and keep pushing that momentum. And so keep going is just this short phrase that means, like it is, like keep going forward, pushing past that threshold. So in distance running, it's like when you think about how far you've ever gone before, or like that seems really hard. When I think about my mantra, it's definitely a reminder that you can do that hard thing. You just have to work for it and take that next step.
But Maddie also isn't naive to the fact that sometimes it's hard to just keep going. It might be a bit more complicated sometimes. Maybe something knocked you down along the way and you're trying to escape a rut. Or if you're like me, you just don't feel like it, even though you know you'll feel better if you just get moving. Maddie says that's why it's important to cultivate a positive and supportive community in fitness.
Find someone, a friend, a fellow running buddy, to hold them accountable. So if you're feeling like you need to get out there, but you can't see the point, have someone text you and just be like, hey, did you get that run in today? Or like a boost of motivation, because that's a really important thing with running. It's often seen as that solo sport, and it is for a lot of people. I love to run alone, but I have, especially this past year, even virtual, found the love in a community. And so I've joined 2 running groups in Winston-Salem, and they're both incredible. And so I think just having that community, to even via Facebook groups and chats, of just boosting people up. And so you asked me what my why is and what keeps me going. And so if you're in a rut, or you're wondering, like, how could I ever even kind of get into running? And this is not even just related to running, is if you're interested in starting anything, finding that reason and holding on to it will give you some motivation to make it all worth it. This running, there's that quote, is like, one day I won't be able to do this anymore, and today is not that day. And so I want to make this a lifelong thing. And for a lot of people, running is a fad. I hope a lot of people who have gotten into it during this pandemic time stay with it, because it is such a way to boost your physical health, but more so mental health. And just, it's a stress relief. It's a time where you can kind of get away from screens. And so I highly encourage everyone to kind of find their why in whatever it is, and just hold on to it tight and keep going.
With no end to coronavirus currently, Maddie doesn't know when the next in-person race will be. She misses the thrill and the community of racing together. But she is thinking about ways to share her passion of running and support others around her. She wants to start coaching.
It's something that just has been on my mind for so many years since I started running. I've learned a lot as I go, and I would love to be able to kind of share that with others. I've had friends kind of ask me to kind of jot down a training plan for a half marathon or a 5K or just running tips. And I love talking about running. And so to be able to do that to help other people. I have been running marathons seriously for 6 years. And so I have a lot of insight to share, but I think over the course of a few years, my running has gone from like me to like us and you. And as much as I can work on my own personal fitness and improving my own race times, I find my favorite part about racing is the people I get to meet before and on and after the start line and the finish line, because those are some incredible people. I have my own story to bring to it, but to get to know other people who then become part of my network, they become friends on Instagram, they become friends on Strava, and their stories are incredible. And so I want to be a part of other people's stories, and to not just have my own running be all of my running, because I think other people are keeping me going, especially during this time.
That's all for this episode of She Plus. If you like what you heard, please give us a review and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Catch up on everything you need to know on our Instagram page at she_plus_pod. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.